Good evening, friends. Welcome to the third episode on Status Single with Shree Season 3, a show that I started in the thick of the lockdown last year because I realized that women in my community status single, a community that was birthed out of a very best selling work of nonfiction, Status Single, that I authored in 2018, comprising voices of 3,500 urban single women from all over India. I realized that that community needed a safe space. There were so many issues that were plaguing the women of my community. I don't like to just call them members because, there's no subscription, there's no fee that they pay. I think we're a women's collective. Um, Women were losing their jobs. There were single mothers who were burdened with, their online education of their children, having to purchase gadgets. There were women like me who were primary caregivers to their aging parents, a lot of them only daughters or women who had moved back into their parental homes because of a divorce or because they had been widowed, or just during the lockdown to take care of sick aging parents. There were single women who were older, senior citizens who were on their own because their children could not come back and reach them during the lockdown. There were also, women with disability who found themselves completely stranded. It was a tough time, and the show was born out of that. We've had two extremely successful seasons, both seasons different from each other in flavor, in the diversity of topics, in the manner of speakers. And this season, we have, I've hashtagged it not unlucky because, as you know, February is typically celebrated as the month of love, thanks to Valentine's Day. Of course, Valentine's Day has suddenly become very controversial in the last couple of years, with all the right wing parties protesting the display of man woman love. But my question is Valentine's Day only about man women love if we were to even celebrate a beautiful occasion like Valentine's Day? I wanted to do this show to showcase just inspiring women from my own community, from all over India, the women who make status single. Of course, season two was mainly about iconic, mentors of the community, peers of the community like Kamla Bhasin ji and Malika Sarabhai, and we had Vinta Nanda and Tanishtha Chatterjee and Srila Dasgupta. This time I wanted to, have women with whom I'm almost talking every day. Some are friends, some are very, very strong community members whose support, whose voice, whose participation makes Status Single the community that it is now and that I envision it to be. Today on the show with me is my guest, my third guest, a friend, a prolific writer who's on the cusp of publishing her highly anticipated first nonfiction book. I hope the next time I have Shohini C, as I call her, she's Shohini Chattopadhyay, award winning journalist. I hope the next time I have Shohini C, I'm also going to add best selling author, award winning author against, or, prefix it before her name. She's won the coveted Ramnath Goenka Award. She's, been selected to prestigious residencies all over the world, and she's been a very senior journalist with the Open magazine in New Delhi. Shohini has a very popular column that she writes now, which focuses or puts the lens on women in cinema, women in popular culture. She debates questions of gender and sexuality as well, and masculinity, in the Film Companion, which is a site or now a YouTube channel that we all love. I follow it quite avidly. And Shohini has managed to do all this and achieve all this and be all this while walking the tightrope of being like me, the primary caregiver to her parents. She's the only daughter. And we're going to get to that part of the story a little later, how Shohini came home, and how, she was working, when her father was unwell, and or she had just about quit her job and she was in the UK, and her life changed like so many of our lives change. And I know there are women in the community who messaged me this morning. And Shohini, it'll be nice for you to know. And before that, welcome to the show. I realize that you're on live with me. So welcome. Wish you a very, very good evening. Namaskar, like they say in Calcutta.
Namaskar. Um, Thank you for your very generous introduction, and I'm looking forward to our adda, as you call it, as always.
As
Um,
always.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So I was just, introducing our audience watching us live on multiple platforms this evening. Um, you know, Sort of because every episode highlights, according to me, and the selection of my speaker is to talk about one particular facet of status single, of being single, of thriving and being successful as a proud, out and proud single woman. And today, that, caregiving, the emotional labor invested by women, the difference in perceptions of caregiving, the structures, or the substructures that, we confront and we deal with are on the table. But before that, Shohini, because you're such a force to be reckoned with in the online world as well, and like me, but on a different platform, as you know, I'm not on Twitter. You are, you have a very interesting name also on Twitter, which you must talk about. Because whenever I've met you, we are drinking coffee, but your Twitter name is Cha. So you, so and I feel that your Twitter posts, your Twitter updates, the things you share, because you often share them with me privately on our addas. And I feel they're not just provocative, but they're also insightful. They also push the envelope, they make people think. But like on Twitter, everything becomes, I think, a jhod. This kalbuishaki, this nor'wester, which just kind of sweeps you here and there, right? So I believe
yeah.
this evening you shared the creative of our show, and you highlighted something which I would like to start. I want to start on that note before handing over the baton to you. That we are a state where the chief minister, the honorable chief minister, is a single woman. She's never been married, just like us. And she's lost both her parents now. Her nephew is, in a sense, like the political heir apparent. Uh, but we've also had icons, cultural icons like Rani Rashmoni, who your tweet mentions, and apparently that's caused a storm in your teacup. So tell us a little bit about that, Shohini. And once again, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Srimoy. Thank you so much. By Twitter standards, it's a small dust up, but it struck me this morning when I was going for my run. I was thinking about our conversation in the evening, and the school right next to my house is actually called Begum Rokeya School. It's always been there,
Mm,
but it struck me that Begum Rokeya is, um, a very well-known educationist and
mm,
perhaps the first known writer of science fiction,
mm,
one of the first in the world, much, much before Ursula Le Guin and Margaret Atwood. She wrote a book called Sultana's Dream.
mm,
And she set up one of the best known schools in the city. Most of the schools in Calcutta, the well known schools, are missionary schools or Protestant schools. But she set up a school called Sakhawat Memorial,
Chakravarti
you
Memorial.
which yeah, Sakhawat Memorial. Her full name is Begum Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain. And when I was younger, I used to actually go swimming in Sakhawat Memorial. They have a swimming pool as well. It's a huge complex in central Calcutta,
Mm,
Lord Sinha Road. Uh, and Begum Rokeya was uh, single in a sense, in that she established the school. She had a thriving career as a writer, very controversial, um, after she became a widow. And it struck me that widowhood is also a form of singledom, which we
absolutely.
often don't recognize. It's a sort of a blind spot. So, coming back to your question about what caused the dust up, it was because I mentioned Rani Rashmoni along with Begum Rokeya, who, of course, I mean, a lot of people know of her. She funded most famously the Dokhineshwar temple, which is identified with Calcutta being a city of Kali, but also so many other things. There are online resources which say that she granted the land on which the National Library of Kolkata stands, which was the first national library actually in the country because the British had their capital here.
mm,
So yeah, I mean, so I had written Rani Rashmuni. Now she was married, like Begum Rokeya. She was married to a Raja, which is another way of saying a large landlord or zamindar. But she spent almost a quarter century as a widow. And just think about it, you're in the 19th century, you're
yeah,
a widow. Usually that is the time when, your claim to the property is staked, right? That's when people question you and you're thrown out of. In fact, that's what happened to Begum Rokeya. She was actually thrown out
thrown out.
by her stepdaughter. Yeah, by her stepdaughter
Mm,
and son-in-law. But
mm,
think about Rani Rashmani holding on to her immense land properties of the Raja, but managing them. And again, this is urban stories. I don't know if the history bears it out, historical record, but where the chief minister now stays, which is largely Kalighat, is where the chief minister's father was supposedly in the employ of one of Rani Rashmuni's descendants.
mm.
Because Kali Ghat, so you see the word Ghat meaning the river came up to there. There was a lot of river trade, and she
Correct.
controlled it. In fact,
Mm,
she was a big benefactress of fishermen in the Hooghly.
mm, mm.
So I just think that it's interesting that so people contested that she was a single woman because
Mm,
she was married to a Raja. So that was the dust up that
mm.
how am I calling her a single? But that is singledom, right? You're holding on to
Absolutely.
this for a
Absolutely.
quarter century, and at
Mm,
that time, look at the property disputes that happen now.
mm.
Remember the property dispute of Lodha and a certain Birla, Priyamvada Birla, who had
Remember that
left.
building. Yeah.
Yeah, look at the disputes when a woman leaves property to somebody that she's not supposed to leave property to. So I mean, look at Rani Rashmani looking after her husband's ample lands and businesses, and like the prosperous men and women of that time, giving a lot to what was a nascently nationalist society, because this is
Mm,
19th century Bengal under the British, where
mm.
the consciousness of the freedom movement arose for the first time. So,
Yes.
and of course, you mentioned the chief minister and her role quite well. So, again, single woman. She, of course, fits the definition of a single woman. But
Yeah.
I think these are, I think widowhood is also a form of singledom,
Yeah,
and
it
such
is.
substantially long widowhood.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, it's this, you're absolutely right because, in my community, in our community status single, the online community which exists and it's thriving on Facebook, I see more and more, there are three categories of women who are joining in droves, right? One is women who are separated. They're going through a
Okay.
separation. They are not legally divorced, but they live away from their husbands either because the husband has abandoned them or because they've left the house. They've been beaten or abused, or they were being cheated upon and they've left, or there was dowry torture, they've left. This is urban India, by the way, right? The second category of women are widows, huge population. And more, what I'm noticing is older single women want to be part of the community. So which is why one of my guests, Preetha, and Preetha was, she kept and we talked about this, this whole this whole image of the single woman. And I'll get to that in the last segment with you when we'll talk about popular culture and where is the single woman in popular culture. But widowhood, yeah, because see, the moment the husband dies, there's no identity left, so that's the
And that
second
is
category.
a huge blind spot, actually,
Yes,
because we know
yes.
that, the figure of the Hindu widow some months ago, or was it a couple of years ago, Hema Malini, the BJP MP, said that, all the Bengali widows have to be driven out of, they must go back to their homes. But the figure of the Bengali widow or the Hindu widow is
Mm.
a figure that we encounter in literature, in period films, and
Yeah,
also news stories, because they
absolutely.
are cast out. They are cast out. Sadly, caste practices of Hinduism of a certain kind, of a certain time, involve the casting out of widows. So, what
Yeah.
are they if they are not single?
Purati,
They're
I
most
mean, I was
obviously
raised.
single.
Yes,
They're
yes.
most obviously single.
Yes, yes. I was raised by a widow, so I always saw Ma as a single woman. I mean, I even today when I recount her struggles or her journey, it's
Yeah.
mainly a single woman. Ma was a widow in her early 30s, when Baba died. But this story, I want to make it about you because you're my special guest today and a dear friend. And like I say, a very important part of the community that I envision. We will, I feel that we're going to be a nation within a nation. That's the way I've always looked at it. With 74.1 million, according to the 2000, it's a decade old census figures that I keep quoting. So, Shohini, I mean, as always, being the scholar that you are, brought up ILO figures just a few minutes ago. And these are figures which were really quoted during the lockdown. I've read many pieces on this, especially given the fact that and I'm constantly going to bring up the word single women. Even in our community, there were single women who had to like look after aging parents. Either they had moved in with their kids into the parents home to take care of either a widowed mother or a really critically ill father, or both. In many cases, there were single women also looking after physically challenged sisters or brothers, or somebody with a mental health issue, with a mental health problem. And at the same time, they were balancing their work. They were really losing their jobs. There were pay cuts, plus they had to cook, they had to clean, look fresh for a Zoom call, take loans and buy their children sometimes a spare phone, because there was only one phone at home till then. And the laptop was basically being used by the woman to do her office work or calls. And you quoted what I think was a very interesting figure, that the average time which is spent by a woman on unpaid domestic work, and the difference between that and the time that a man actually spends on domestic work or labor, or however you want to call it, and the gap in that. So I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about that. And then against that backdrop, I want you to tell us about your journey home, because actually, for those listening, and I'm already getting so many messages for questions to Shohini, so hold on to your horses, she's here for a while. But we met when Shohini reached out to me very organically. Until then, she had just been somebody who existed on Facebook. And Shohini puts this that 100 people, 200 people had written to me. She was one of them. I honestly cannot subscribe to this view. But to cut the long story short, because it's her hour, I met Shohini when she reached out to me saying that, hey, would you like to grab a drink or a cup of tea or a coffee, which is Shohini's favorite, when you come to the city of Calcutta? And I came back because my father quit his job and he started a business out of Bangalore. And I was not working. My dad had left his job. So we had to come back to Calcutta. So it was a very, very challenging time for my family. And our ancestral home, which is now the apartment, the high rise where I'm sitting and doing this chat, was, going to be handed over to us by the builder. So there was all of that. And that's how we met. So, Shohini, after you take us through the gender statistics, I want you to do a bit of a time travel for our viewers and listeners to the moment when your life changed and you became the Shohini of now.
Yeah, this is an important point that you raised, and because we had a little bit of a conversation before we came online. I knew that we'd be talking about caregiving in particular.
Yeah.
So the ILO, the International Labour Organization, has a report from 2018-2019 which says that uh, the average Indian woman spends 297 minutes uh,
Mm,
per day on housework, which also includes care work,
yeah.
and the average Indian man spends 31 minutes.
Mm,
So 297 minutes is almost 5 hours. I think 3 minutes short of 5 hours, and
mm,
31 minutes is 1 minute more than a half an hour.
yeah.
So this is so 5 hours versus half an hour. So that's a difference of 4.5 hours. That's like more than half the work day already.
Mm,
Um, yeah, so this was a survey of some 67 countries. It's easily available in the public domain. You
mm,
need search for ILO if anybody's interested who's
mm,
listening. ILO, International Labour Organization, um, Care Work 2018-2019 report, and you should be able to get it. My own story within it is, um, I think, fairly typical, but I'll acknowledge my privilege within that. But it falls within this 297 minutes to 31 minutes framework, really. I was doing the Chevening Fellowship in London, which is
London.
the British government, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office gives it out. And this was the summer of 2015. Um, and I got a call from my mother saying, "Your father is in a coma." I'll be brief about it, because I mean, if when somebody has a end stage organ disease, then it's a very, very long and complex problem. But he had slipped into a coma suddenly. Um, until that time, we hadn't known that he was so unwell.
Mm,
I flew down, like it's a Hindi film or even a Hollywood film. I flew down from London to Calcutta as quickly as I could. It was a bank holiday weekend. Um, he came out of the coma, but it was the diagnosis was grim. It was
mm,
an end stage liver disease.
mm,
Right from there, they said the doctor said the best solution would be a transplant. So
mm,
2015 um, to 2018 was spent in, when somebody has this is anything above 3 months is called chronic disease actually.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you have diabetes, if you have the HIV virus, you're called chronically ill. If you have
Mm,
depression as well, but an an end stage organ disease diagnosis is pretty similar to an advanced stage of cancer.
cancer.
There's a crisis lurking every day,
Mm,
or maybe not every day, but you never know when there's a crisis lurking. So
mm,
it was absolutely impossible to do any meaningful work. There's no question of a job. Though I had quit my job and I was beginning to work on my the book that I'm working on now. I had found an agent with great difficulty because it's hard for people of color, people who don't live in the Western world, to find an agent in London or New York or Hong Kong. These are the global capitals of publishing as well, not just of global finance. And so I was looking to devote the next couple of years, 3 years of my life to finishing this book. Instead, I spent the next 3 years looking after
mm,
my family and essentially saving my father's life by facilitating his transplant. I often say that I did a all India darshan of India's hospitals, from because we are in Calcutta, we went to Delhi, we've been to Chennai, we've been to Hyderabad, we've been to Bombay, where we eventually got the
Yeah.
transplant done.
Mm.
And but at the same time, I was also primary caregiver to my grandmother, who was diagnosed with an advanced stage of
Cancer.
bowel cancer, yeah, colon cancer, sorry, in late 2017, which is when we had met actually.
Mm.
So I, being in Calcutta, not having a job, not being a person with a job, I had quit my job because I wanted to finish my book after finding an agent, landing an agent.
Mm.
But I found myself caregiving for my entire family, really.
Mm.
I don't regret it at all. I feel it was a life changing, life shifting experience.
Mm.
But I'm just saying this descriptively, not
Mm.
as a value judgment, not out of bitterness, not out of resentment. But this is what I spent about 3 years. And when you have such um, tectonic changes in your life, then it's very
Mm.
difficult to okay, transplant is over, now I'm going to go back to writing the book that I was writing. It
No,
doesn't
you can't.
happen like that,
Mm.
because we are human beings, we have emotions, um, we are exhausted.
Mm.
um, I actually did a story around that time when I was caregiving for my father, helping him get his transplant. My mother was the donor, about how women are the majority of living organ donors. Yeah,
Yeah.
quite
Mm.
stark figures of. I got data from 10 hospitals, some of them through the Right to Information Act, because they're public hospitals, for 10 years. And the data showed more than 70% of uh, kidneys in living donor kidney transplants came from women,
Mm.
and more than 60% of livers from living donor liver transplants came from women.
Yeah.
But the reverse is not true. I mean, less than 25% of living donor kidneys go to women in transplants,
Mm.
and only about 19% of livers go to women.
Mm.
And most interestingly, the same, if not to the same extent, but the discrepancy, the skew carries on even for infant pediatric transplants. So
Right.
you see the difference setting in very early. I'm only mentioning this because this is a show about single women.
Yeah.
After I did the story, my father's doctor actually told me, I have some more news for you. If you think this is a story, now I find, because she said that, very kind of her to say that, she said that my story made her much more aware of the discrepancy of among recipients, women recipients as well. But she said that now she comes across patients who say, I have an unmarried niece, why we can use her. I have an unmarried daughter. Why don't we? I mean, in fact, even for me, the one of the doctors in Delhi had said that this is great. You're not even married, so we'll just take the liver. And this is a 14-inch cut. Incredible thing that my mother did. But yeah, it's a 14-inch cut. It's everybody recovers wonderfully.
Mm.
Uh, Donor deaths are largely uncommon, but they do happen. But recovery takes almost 6 months of your life.
Yes.
And I mean, though the doctor told me that this is great and you can actually get married right after you give your liver donation, you'll probably get more husbands because people will think um,
You're a
this is
martyr.
a,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, so that's that's how it was, and it took me more than a year after that. And then I was also caregiver because naturally my parents were tired. My father had just had a transplant, my mother had just given her liver, and my grandfather, who has advanced dementia, he sort of slipped into his final and most vegetative state the year after, so I had to take over again.
Mm.
um, in my case, I'm actually grateful that I don't have siblings, so there's no question of getting into a discussion or a debate about who does the caregiving and who does the decision making.
mm,
But I often wonder that if I were a man, if I were a man of the same age, what would the expectations of me have been and what would my decision have been?
mm, mm. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, I feel like I needn't necessarily have been the primary caregiver to my grandmother because
Mm,
I have an uncle.
mm,
But I was the person who was without a job, so to speak. So
mm,
I always consider myself a working woman, a full-time working woman,
mm,
because one can write and research from anywhere. But I was the one without a job, so I was the one who could be told. And once again, I don't regret it at all. I think it's very precious. Uh, Not just and I don't mean this in the sense of seva, that the Indian cultural attitude of seva, but it's just remarkable to be able to look after a person when they are very ill, because you get infinite wisdom,
mm,
and
mm.
you understand truly, I think, in a way that which seems remote when you read it in a book, what is the meaning of life and death.
Right.
But I
Right.
wonder what it would have been if I were a man.
Mm. You've like the reason I'm so quiet, and my other speakers will agree that Shri, you're listening quietly. Otherwise, because Shohini, for me, it's a very emotional. Like I did a live just before the show with you, and I said this is probably going to be one of my most personal and emotional shows. Because as you know, in 2019, when I was in the throes of my book tour, which was practically organized single-handedly by me, I got a call at 2:30 in the morning by Geru's mother, who's our house staff and stays with us full time. And my mother had been running a fever the whole week before, saying "Mashima chole gache," and she was howling on the phone. And I did something which I remember there was this Dilip Kumar film, I forget the name, which had Anil Kapoor also. And there's a scene where his wife passes away on the street, and he's stopping every car and saying, "Eh, like koi hai, leke jao," like desperate. And I felt like that night because I was randomly calling people that can somebody just go and see if Ma is there or not. And I had a choice. Of course, my father was also there, so he rushed back. And I had friends, wonderful, two of my uncles also very kind to immediately come. And Ma was taken to Medica, and so on and so forth. I went through with the launch, the very next day, facing a room of over 200 people in Bangalore. I flew back, uh, and I was immediately taken to ICCU, where I saw her, in a glass room, because, as you know, like COVID, swine flu is equally contagious. So, the same kind of protocols are maintained. And I knew then, Shohini, that for me, I'm not comparing because, I don't believe anyone's journeys are similar. But it was like a watershed moment for me, and then I realized that suddenly my life is so much similar to what I had seen my mother going through in her 40s. When suddenly from being the daughter, she became, in a sense, the guardian, the mother, the decision maker, the banker, the person to talk to doctors. She was in that role. Something which you said, and I remember reading your article. I had even shared it in the community, the one which you did on transplant, live transplant donors mainly being women. And haven't you always noticed this, that I'm in my 40s now, you're of course 6 years younger than me, but most of the times we discuss our parents now, their ill health, their checkups, their idiosyncrasies, maybe skirmishes at home, the 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 nok joke of a household, especially if you're staying with them, the loneliness that we go through while existing within a family, because our work is something that is unrelated to our parents. I mean, your family and my family are in no way connected to the professions that we pursue as adults, right? And of course, financial pressures, taking decisions. But there's always this thing which hits me when I go, when say I take Ma to an eye clinic, or I've taken Idu when he had his operation in Calcutta and Fortis. I mainly see women, you know either they are the daughters, or they are the daughter-in-laws, or they are the sisters, or they are the mothers. I see them, like, sometimes huddling together like penguins, and they are the ones running after the doctor, the iriki hobe, they are the ones frantically calling outside the. But I believe this, and I'm so glad that you brought up the case of your uncle, your maternal uncle. In my case, my mother never had a brother or a sister. She's the only daughter like me. So the brunt of caregiving fell on my mother, and she lost her parents within 1.5 months of each other. And my grandfather was actually always the more ill one, but my grandmother had esophageal cancer, and she died within 9 months, 9 horrific months for us as a family. Um, I've often thought about this myself, Shohini, that men get away with it, right? I mean, I have had men, and you have also had friends whose parents, Kolkata is pretty much like a pensioner's paradise, especially certain areas like maybe the one where you live and the one where I, which are residential areas essentially. So I have seen that the men friends, for instance, whose parents say live in Calcutta, okay, they just say that, we are sending money, we've organized the nurses. Amra to video call, we did a meeting with the doctor. But I have seen in a family where two sisters are there, Shohini, and one
Yeah.
of the sisters is the single sister. She's not married. She's the one. Sometimes I had a woman say this on record in my book, that I have four sisters, right, who are all married. But the brunt of taking care of my paralyzed mother, who's also mentally unstable, is on me. Is on me. And the expectation was that you leave your job, because and a lot of people even told her that, dekho, your four sisters are married to wealthy men, ghar tere ko de jayenge, you'll inherit the house, na, you'll get a roof over your head, so look after your mother. And she said, I have not had a relationship with a man. I've lost friends, because men are very scared of this, by the way. I don't know if you face this. Let's talk about this. Because I've got this. Oh, you're the only daughter. Oh, pensive, pent up silence, judgmental silence. So, this gender gap, even in caregiving, this
Yeah.
discriminatory attitude, which I think is very apparent, but we don't talk about it. So, I mean, if you're raising it, then even I am saying that it is so true. Men get away with it.
Yeah.
Rarely do men, I mean, of course, in my family, my uncle has given up a very high flying career to come and be a caregiver to his aging parents, but he's one in a million. I've seen son in laws look after their in laws, the good son in laws, the dutiful, responsible men. But most of the time, it's the daughter in law who's even taking care of her parents and her in-laws. And there are these kind of things, right? Ki you can't spend too much of time in your baper bari. Khub beshi baper bari jai. Why did the relationship fail? Because the man is sulking, that the wife used to go too often to look after her sick parents. So you've been an only child. We've all gone through the arranged marriage route. We've tried. Our parents may have tried. Have you faced these prejudices from men?
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I think it's definitely socialized that caregiving is the woman's role because of the maternal uh, figure, because of nurturing, because of childbearing, and so we are supposed to look after. So I feel, I actually think, this is my subjective opinion. I don't know if there's data about, that unfortunately there isn't data about, how much caregiving sons do versus how much caregiving daughters do, how much caregiving husbands do versus how much caregiving wives do. But I definitely think that men strategically, when they look at mates, they think about a woman who can do this work for them too, who can look
Hmm.
after their parents and everybody who does. Because I've been on so many dates which have fizzled out in the first or second date, where the man says, "Oh, my sisters are amazing. You know, they do all the work. I just pay the bill,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
I just leave it to them." This
Hmm.
is a great way of. I think this is the best thing. But they're super women, and but this is the best way to do it. Um, So the I'm also actually now strategically making these decisions. The moment I hear that, I think no,
No.
no,
Yeah.
because
Hmm.
because then
Block.
I would empathize with the sisters as well, because the sisters will naturally think that, okay, so now brother dearest has gotten married, so now it is our chance to get a little bit of a relief from caregiving duties. Let his
Hmm.
wife do it, because they are doing it for their
Their
husbands and their
in-laws. Yeah.
partners. Yeah, I wanted to tell you that, interject when you were talking about the lady who has several sisters, but is single and finds herself burdened with, most probably, my guess is that the sisters are doing the caregiving
For the in-laws.
for the for the husband. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
feel men make this decision strategically, where
Hmm.
in general, a woman had told me, a boss had told me, not a boss but a senior editor had once told me that, in the media, she's in the media, she had told me that, why do men get married? Because they want a good, quote unquote, kajal look,
Hmm.
somebody to make sure that there is a good food on the table, clothes are washed, laundered, and pressed, and
Hmm.
then there is, somebody to look after the things that need looking after.
Hmm.
This is why primarily men get married. And of course, sex within the marriage, there's always the option of sex outside the marriage. But that option exists anyway, right? Even without marriage, you can
Hmm.
have sex. But why do you need a wife? You need a wife because this is what you need to get done.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, I wish actually the fact that there is no data about this sort of
Yeah.
thing, who is doing caregiving, is actually a sign that there is no thought given to this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Recently, the actor, thespian, dancer Kamal Hassan has said that, now he's a politician, that he wants women to be paid for housework. I think it's a
Hmm.
very important step. It may be
Hmm.
3,000 rupees a month, but
Hmm.
it's setting a floor, it's setting a price and saying this is work, this is economic activity, and it
Hmm.
needs to be recognized.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean,
in the UK, where I studied and did fellowships thereafter, you get, even this is a conservative government for many years now. You get vouchers from the government if you are a caregiver to your son, to your brother, to your whoever you are a caregiver to. You get vouchers from the government. That's a recognition that
hmm.
you are foregoing productive economic activity that would
Hmm.
earn you money to do this, and therefore the government is recognizing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And remember we talked.
I just want to read you something about from Begum Rokia,
Hmm.
because we began with her.
Yeah.
In childhood, I was deprived of my father's love, while my married life was devoted to nursing my husband through his illness. Every day I checked his urine, prepared his food, and wrote to his doctor. Twice I became a mother, but the joy of holding my babies to my breast was short lived. One left me at the age of 5 months, the other died when it was 4 months old. And for 22 years, I have been suffering the torment of widowhood. But I just wanted to tell you that, this is not an unusual life, I guess. I mean, Rokia became
It's not.
remarkable for the writing, but I think
Yeah.
it is not an unusual life
Yeah.
for
No,
women.
I'm glad that you brought up the attitude of men, even in the dating stratosphere. When it comes to a woman who has a lot of caregiving responsibilities. So this is the hypocrisy that, as you say, according to your former boss, this is what they're looking for in a wife, right? They want somebody. In fact, in
But it's
Bengal,
not hypocrisy. It goes with the territory, right? That
territory. Yeah,
if
I
this
mean,
is if this is what you want, and
this is
then
no,
you think that
look at it. In when they want to date, when they want a girlfriend, they want somebody available at their beck and call. Let's go for a vacation. Let's go for a staycation. Let's have a quickie. Meet me here. Come here. Let's check into a hotel room. So somebody like always there, ready and prepped. Mostly for what?
no,
So
no. But I think it goes with that. I don't think it's hypocrisy. They want you for themselves. That
yeah,
you must be doing this not only, but you must be at my service.
at my
I
service.
think so. I
Hmm.
think so because I speak a lot of late about. I articulate caregiving. I think it's one of the things that people don't talk about.
Yeah,
Sadly,
yeah,
um, I mean, this is another conversation, but it's like miscarriage. People just don't talk about having a miscarriage and the sorrow, the grief of that.
yeah,
People just don't talk about caregiving.
yeah, yeah. Or trauma.
But I
The
trauma,
trauma of
yeah.
it, the trauma of suddenly getting this phone call and then your life changing, the trauma that I went through of that night. Nobody has helped me process it, because you've just had to go on from day to day, like just keep hustling, like they say. So you just keep
Yeah.
going, you just keep going.
And there's no larger acknowledgement of it, actually. Sadly,
No.
there's no larger acknowledgement of, what, how difficult caregiving is. I saw recently a acclaimed writer, and I'm sure like a really wonderful person as well, saying, talking about being a young mother and saying, when do we write?
Hmm.
And I responded to that saying, if you're a caregiver, when do you write? Because
Hmm.
children grow up after a while.
Hmm. Hmm.
If you're a caregiver, to um, say your son, in the lockdown, I was in my capacity in my office as a health reporter. I spoke to many parents who have children who have bad spines, all kinds of, I realized people have all kinds of chronic, incredibly debilitating illnesses, young people born
Hmm.
with them. And
Hmm.
people live such hard lives, and they were suddenly, many of them were suddenly without their professional caregivers. Because if you
Hmm.
have this kind of spinal uh, congenital defects, then you actually need professional help, because you need to be in very special um,
Hmm.
what do you call them, chairs, which give you
Chair.
support, and
Yeah.
which,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I realized that, I was I thought I knew about caregiving, and I was like, I know nothing about caregiving. And just imagine um, the emotional toll of this mother, because she's thinking that I'd, there's no end to this problem. It's a horrible way to think about any life, but
Hmm.
particularly a child's life. And
Yeah.
there's no conversation about it, right?
Hmm. Hmm. There is no conversation about it, and I think, this, as you said, that there's this assumption that women, and we women take it on ourselves sometimes, that women are great at multitasking. We are so good. We are like Dosho Bhuja, Ma Durga with her 10 hands. So here we are feeding, with a feeding bottle. Here we are rushing to the kitchen and giving tarka in the dal. Here we are quickly, putting a roller through our hair and sitting for a Zoom call. Here we are going and getting a blood test ordered for our mother or father. So I think a lot of this pressure is exerted on women by the kind of conditioning, because we've seen the women in our lives, in our families, just be self-sacrificial, crusaders and martyrs. And martyrhood is celebrated in women. Come on, I mean, this is a country where widows used to sit on a funeral pyre, right? And
Yeah, it's
this is the
cultural. It's
ultimate
cultural.
symbol of, it's cultural. It's cultural. Sacrifice and satihood and sitahood are in our DNA, so to speak. But one thing, Shoini, that I want to talk about is also, I often see this. Okay, I see a lot of parents who have daughters who are very dutiful, very responsible, and whenever I use the word dutiful, I'm not liking it because it feels like hum boj ke andar hai and all that. But what I mean is responsible. What I mean is performing the duties of being a caregiver. I've seen often those parents being very blasé about it, you know. Yeah, I mean, korbe to, mera to korbe, mera to dakhe. Haven't you heard
Yeah.
this comment? You know, but why
Yeah,
are we
I mean, I think it's cultural. I think it's cultural.
Actually, why are we letting men off the hook? Why are parents letting the boys off the hook? So when the boys are even as much as making a cup of tea, I find this nauseating. Whenever we go nuts about, a man, oh my husband bringing me tea in the morning, my husband, taking my daughter. Men don't celebrate. Have you seen on social media how many men are saying this about the partners that they have? That she makes me tea, she packs my dabba, she gets the clothes laundered, or forget about that. The fact that she's always emotionally available for me 24 by 7, like a call center, like a helpline. They
I think
don't.
for many of us, it's a surprise that certain men have partners at all, right? It's a shock. We come to know, and then we are like, okay, why did you tell us that you are? So, yeah. But there are a couple of men who do that, I guess, and then they're celebrated a lot for that. Um, there was a time I was very angry about these things. I won't I won't condescend to you and tell you that I don't. Maybe you're in the angry phase now. I don't know what stage of processing it, but I think it's cultural, and that's why I think you're doing a fantastic thing by bringing this up in conversation. It's a start. Let's talk about these things,
Mm,
um, because I mean, cultural expectations, cultural programming is huge. Socialization is huge. I mean, after all, what are we talking about? Vidyashagar is whom we credit for women's education of the
yeah,
girl child. So, how many years ago was Vidyashagar? Maybe just 100 plus odd years ago, versus millennia of conditioning of these roles
mm,
of goddesses with, you said, Doshabhuja, of goddesses like that, Durga, who is shepherding her four children, but also Mohishashur Mordini, right? That's the
mm,
10-day battle where she destroys Mohishashur, who was such a formidable enemy that all the gods together couldn't finish him. So therefore,
yeah,
Durga was
yeah,
created, Shakti was created, they came together. So this,
mm,
how 100 odd years of Vidyashagar versus so many years of cultural, and even now these conversations, every time, if you remember the conversation during Padmavat, I remember Swara Bhaskar, the actor,
mm,
saying, I love Sanjay Bhansali's work, but the glorious fashion show like Johar was problematic. So many
yeah,
people jumped at her and said, not at all, this was an honorable thing to do because you are protecting your honor. Recently, I mentioned Kamal Hassan. Kamal Hassan said, my party wants to pay women for housework.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
the actor who I called Sangana Ranaut, Sangana immediately said that, what is this? How can you put a price to, a woman's love? So
mm,
this is what we're, I mean, I'm not saying this is what we're against. I'm saying, but this is, what is this? This is not, I'm not going to say that these women are incredibly regressive. No, this is cultural conditioning.
cultural,
This is
yeah,
what, this is what it is. We need to see
yeah,
it, and then we need to start conversations like you're
yeah.
starting a conversation. And
Yeah.
you see it in you mentioned that I write about film, but you see it in Hindi cinema, which is certainly the richest film industry in India. In perhaps in parts of the country, it is the most influential industry. You see it in Hindi cinema. You see how men giving care to women is, you know, celebrated, glorified.
Yeah.
So you had a movie
Yeah.
like
You were
October,
mentioning Pink.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, October, beautiful movie. Pink and
Hmm.
October and Pink are produced by the same house, actually, Shujit Shorkar, whose work I love. Individually, I think Pink is a great, lovely movie. Um, Same with October. But uh, the look at the way it celebrates a man who gives care, and immediately it sets that up, right? Then there's
Hmm.
another film, also made by a Bengali filmmaker. It's a remake of a Korean film. The film is called Teen, and again it had Amitabh Bachchan as a caregiver to
Hmm.
his wheelchair-bound wife, and he's doing the shopping, he's making the soup, he's fixing the bulbs, he's looking after the granddaughter.
Hmm.
So look
Hmm.
at this. Whereas, I always think of Rituparno Ghos's Arekti Premer Golpo, where a man uh, essentially brings home this theatre actor modeled on Chapul Bahaduri, who's
Hmm.
played the role of women, brought this woman, quote unquote, actress
Hmm.
um, home as a mistress. And the last third of the film is that it's the mistress who looked after
Looks
the
yeah.
ailing, it's a
Babu.
beautiful film.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ailing wife. The
Yeah.
Babu was out and about looking for a younger keep, concubine,
Hmm.
or whatever you call it. But it was the
Hmm.
mistress who looked after
Yeah.
the bed confined wife. There's
Wife.
also Bhumika, which I like very much. Same story, it's the story of Hansa Vadkar, the
Amish Puri.
um,
Smita.
yeah, Smita Patil plays Hansa Vadkar, who is the
Hmm.
celebrated, absolutely iconic Marathi star.
Hmm.
Um, and in the film that is supposed to be based on her life, the Zamindar brings her home, and aside from being his marital partner in bed, she has to look after the son and
Yeah.
the bed confined first wife,
Yeah. So
who
glorified domestic help, basically. That adage when Bengali men would go to marry, they would say, "Ma, আমি তোমার জন্য দাসী আনতে যাচ্ছি." Mother, I'm going to bring a maid for you. So
Yeah, I'm just
essentially,
going to interject and say that, I celebrate domestic work actually, and,
same here.
credit to
Yeah.
all this. Yeah, yeah, credit to all of them. There's no shame at all in doing domestic work. And
Hmm.
I'm just saying that, this is the extent to which caregiving is expected out of women. That,
Yeah. So
if
we have this part timer. I mean, she cannot come now because she used to travel by train. So her husband is a philanderer. He used to beat her up. She has deep gashes, on her arm, on her neck, which is, he's put his shoe here, he's bitten her here. Horrible. But when my mom or me used to tell her that you come here and stay, what is the problem, we'll support you, she said, how can I leave my mother-in-law? My mother-in-law is over 100 years old. I mean, imagine, the man is cheating, the man is beating her up. So as you're saying, even and my comments and using the word maid was in no way to subjugate or
not at all,
create
not
a
at
class
all.
bias. But I'm just saying that, and I'm going to Shoini, shift the conversation a bit, just the gears, shift the gears a bit to the workplace, because I faced this. I remember a time when I had to suddenly, there was a crisis in Bangalore, and I had to go, with my parents to Bangalore. And my boss, who was a married woman boss, much older than me in her 50s, she said, what emergency? So I told her the emergency, that, it's to do with my you know, family and my dad's side. I have to go. She said, my God, you are not even married. Tumhara kya emergency? You know? So if you're taking leave for a sick child, then, okay, motherhood is venerated, right? But if you are taking leave saying that I need to take my mother, to the hospital, or my mother is bedridden, I need to work from home. I'm talking about pre-COVID, when work from home wasn't the normal or whatever. Then it's like, I mean, in fact, so many single women, Shohini, complain that they're dumped with more work because the sweeping assumption is who's waiting for you home, and you don't have to go and make roti and sabji for anybody. Not that working women actually cook. Most of them have the wherewithal to employ help, but they're still held accountable for the food on the table. So have you ever, because you're an independent journalist and you've managed to stay afloat even at a time when you faced and braved your worst and your most grave personal crisis, right, which was the health crises at home with your grandmother, then Mashi and Mishu, your parents, then your paternal grandfather. So does it affect work? Because schedules can be erratic. Sometimes they are very erratic for me. I faced this for 1 year when Ma was not well, and especially because when you have a child also at home, they get sick, something, it's totally erratic. But a sister and parents are never the same as in-laws and husband.
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually, I mean, one of the things I was most grateful for during these crises was that I was not employed, and therefore
Hmm.
I was, not accountable to anybody for my time. I didn't have to field calls in which I had to inform somebody that I'm going to be back by such and such date. But I've also learned not to mention this in a professional context at all. I'm very happy to have these conversations and to write about it, but never to quote unquote give an excuse, because this is what it sounds like. I've actually thought a lot about it, and I think it's because it comes from not taking domestic work seriously or giving it its value, because there's always somebody to do this kind of. Actually, if you think about it now, I realize I've been researching this, that it's not only now, yes, of course, people are living much longer now, but it's not only now that um, there are patients who are confined to bed. This has been
Hmm.
there for many, many years.
For many
In
years,
fact,
yeah.
the word "aya" comes from a colonial construct. So, in fact, there was a time, there is actually a building in London which used to be the middle house or sort of safe house for ayahs once they landed in London. They were taken from here because labor is cheap, to be a wet nurse, to be a so it's a colonial construct, and some of them were actually abandoned as soon as they landed or soon after they were no longer useful, because
Hmm.
sometimes people would fall sick during the long ship journey. Sometimes the patient that they were going for had passed away. Sometimes they contracted a disease. So this has been there for a very long time, and I think that is why this is because it has come cheap,
Hmm.
and because it has not been recognized, acknowledged, articulated, it is not valued as difficult work, and you
Hmm.
can't talk about it.
Hmm.
But I've faced this, speaking personally, I've faced this a lot from professional contacts who would be very thoughtful initially, ask, how was your father doing? How are things at home? Why are you in the hospital again? And of course, this is not everybody, but most people, I realize, grow tired of hearing things are not good, or things are, I'm in a difficult place right now, I'm struggling. This is not a conversation people are happy to have. It's a
Hmm.
difficult conversation, which
Hmm.
again makes me recognize that this is a conversation that we need to have. We need to normalize this. So I've stopped talking about it with regard to work. I'm very happy to be an advocate, to write about it in my essays, which I
Hmm.
do. I've actually written an essay about caregiving and the Hindi film's depiction of it.
Hmm.
But um, it is, I think it's hard for people to understand, because it's not that such lives are uh, unusual, that that I'm terribly
Hmm.
uh, unlucky. So I don't think so. I
Mm,
don't think this is an unlucky or very unusual situation. But I think most people manage in, especially in the subcontinent, to get by with help, whether it's ayahs, whether it's nurses, whether it's mashis, to get by with it. Um, and they don't value this work, They sort of
mm,
like,
mm,
there's a beautiful book called The Politics of Precarity, which has come out, which is about the nurse slash ayah slash mashi labor, which is always a floating.
floating.
Calcutta is probably the, yeah, yeah, yeah. They don't have much rights, and you can always replace the nurse by calling the center and saying, this nurse is very Oshopo. She asked for tea at whatever time in the morning, and
Oh,
like
she
I
was
want
sleeping
another nurse, or she was
off
sleeping,
and up.
whatever. Yeah, yeah. But I think it's because it's so cheap and so easily available
Mm,
that this conversation is not. But if you talk to, it's very common for all of us, we're privileged enough to have help. If you talk to help, you'll realize that many of them do this work at home themselves. They have tended to their mothers in law. You mentioned the lady who cooks for you, or
mm,
they are tending to their mothers in law, to their sisters in law,
mm,
to their husbands. They're doing it.
mm,
It's a part of life. But yeah,
It's
I mean, yeah, this is not recognized. I think the only thing that is recognized is maternity, because you have maternity leave. That also was a huge battle, but
mm,
that's the only thing that is
mm,
recognized, that
mm,
motherhood. There's no
mm.
caregiving leave as such.
Yeah.
So I guess this is a conversation, that this is a fight that we need to have, and we need to
Mm.
ask for
Shoini,
it.
what about the emotional support that a caregiver needs? What
Yeah.
about the friendships which melt away when there's a crisis that's prolonged? Not just work associations. What about those maybe an interesting date who fizzles out because all you can talk about or at least bring up quite frequently when if and when you meet is the problem at hand, which is ill health. And I find this very problematic about India in general, about Indian society, Indian family, that we don't discuss death. We don't, like nobody prepares us for death. Like if there's a very sick parent or grandparent, there's always discussion about property. Who will, if there are 3 4 brothers, then after my father passes away, then who's going to get it, or who'll get my mom's jewelry, whatever she has left after distributing in the bank. But nobody talks about the aftermath of death, you know and therefore I think there's no effort to process it when it happens. And I've always found that because there are single women in the community and otherwise who are also full-time caregivers along with balancing work, just the way you and I are, to parents or siblings who have mental health challenges or who may have a disability, you know. And very often when I'm talking to them, I can sense they are so tired, they're beleaguered, and they themselves are actually on the brink of depression, just feeling like their backs up to the wall. And one of the girls once told me that, I said, do you have a support group? She said, yeah, but nobody understands. Nobody wants to listen to a sob story. When I call up a friend and I meet her for coffee, um, she wants to bitch about her mother-in-law. I mean, she was talking about a married friend. She wants to bitch about her mother-in-law. She wants to brag about her husband's promotion or some occasion anniversary coming up. But I just want to, like, for me, I'm so worried that the night mashi is going away, and I work at night in a call center, and I'm so worried that I'm not able to find a replacement because it has to be trustworthy, all of that. So I mean, I've often felt this, that I felt this, I feel this rather, as a survivor family, that my mother and my maternal grandparents, who were primary caregivers to my biological father, who took his own life, needed healing, they needed therapy, they needed grief counseling, they needed support. I find this structure also grossly missing. Apart from maybe communities, like in my community, I'm always supporting women, and on our Sunday calls, we often, bring up these issues. But apart from that, not really much.
Yeah, I think the mental health conversation has really just begun.
Yeah.
The government passing the act, the new act in 2017 was a step, and there are some remarkable advocates, but too far and too few. But really, this is again like caregiving. This is just a conversation that really hasn't. Uh, it's just not there. It's just
Mm,
not there. I
mm,
mean, my experience, since you asked about friends and boyfriends, it's very similar. Um, I think it's the same thing that nobody wants to talk about. I remember very vividly a conversation I was having with a very good friend in London, and I was saying that one of the concerns, one of the genuine anxieties we have is my grandfather's incontinence. Now, incontinence is actually a fairly common problem. If you look at a well-known brand of adult diapers called Dignity, you will see that Dilip Tahil, the actor, and Suhasini Mule, the actor, are brand ambassadors for it.
mm,
Now, I feel not enough is talk said about this. I'm amazed that Dilip Tahil and Suhasini Mule agreed to do this. Maybe the money was good. I don't know, but it's great, right? I mean, it's great.
mm,
But I remember my friend, we were eating brunch. It was a Sunday, and she was like, "Please, can we stop talking about this? Uh, I don't want to talk about this at all."
mm,
And then thereafter, the relationship, the friendship soon came to an end. It's what the word that we use very often, too often. There's an epidemic of ghosting in the world today, but
mm,
it was a ghosting. But I remember that vividly, and I carry that the memory of that back with me. So that's why in professional, when it's work related, I'm very wary of bringing this sort of thing up. But incontinence is such a common problem,
mm,
and many of us will have it. I mean,
mm.
it's very possible that. Uh, and it's so sad that I think it's so not sad, but it's so strange that we don't want to talk about our own vulnerability, right? We're
Absolutely.
all going to die. Yeah, we don't want to talk about. But I remember I've been to Germany a couple of times on fellowships, and I remember that one of my fellows there at the time, we were staying at the same flat. She was doing a story about death cafes. There's a movement called the Death Cafe movement where, people just organize this over Facebook, over social media, and then they talk about death, whether it's a death which has happened recently, whether it's a death that they fear, somebody terminally ill. And I think the Death Cafe had come to Chennai, to India, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, maybe death is a cultural taboo everywhere. But
Yeah.
as always, these conversations have begun in the West, at least.
Mm.
Yeah. But
Really,
yeah, people don't talk about it.
people don't. I mean, we're reaching the end of our adda, and I just looked at the timer, and I'm like, we've spoken for over an hour, as always, and with all my guests. Sometimes, like I say this on every show, I feel I need one full day with the speakers. So many things that come to my mind as and when the adda starts. You wrote a very interesting film companion column on domestic work, you know,
Mm.
and you cross referenced a movie which had the popular Bengali actress Swastika Mukherjee in it, right? Which is, I think, currently on Hoichoi at the moment it's playing. And I want you to talk about that column because it was fabulous. And I think I'm going to, in the last segment, ask you to talk about at least the stereotype of single women. Who are the single women? There are no single women to begin with. I can remember, of course, the horrendous FOMO shots, which I've been vociferous, as you know, in slamming. And of course, there's been, like, say, a page 3 Madhur Bhandarkar, the Konkona, and it's always the journalist. Have you noticed this? It's always the journalist or this Bipasha Basu in that very sharply, that very sharp business suit, you know. So, or she's Ekta Kapoor's single woman, the Bin Biahi Bua, who's perennially poisoning the food or instigating some family politics. So tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that as we sort of bring the whole adda to a closure.
Yeah, not to correct you, but simply because these are brands. But I wrote that for Huffington Post
Huffington
and not
Post, yeah.
for FC. So just a not a correction, but just a
Yes,
revision.
yes, my bad. Yeah.
Um, yeah. Um, I wrote about two films. There's a film called Tasher Ghor on Hoichoi, and there's a
Mm,
film also called there's a film called The Lovely Mrs. Mukherjee,
mm,
which is probably used to be on Z5. Both these films are very interesting comments on how marriage in the subcontinent can actually be is actually a contract for domestic servitude.
correct.
So in Tasher Ghar, of course, this is very much a lockdown film. You see a woman in the course of one locked down day, serving her husband from the time you see her. It's a brief 50 odd minute film. So from the time you see her with her hair up in a gamcha, she's just come out of a bath, she serves tea, then she serves breakfast, and it's a solo performance, so you only see Shostika,
Mm,
and then even before she's done with breakfast, you never see her eating. She's just
yeah.
having a cup of tea. She's making cakes. Then the husband is asking for why is it so long? When is lunch? So you only see her preparing food, a service provider essentially, and
Mm,
also talks about other things which are just about coming into the conversation, like miscarriage,
mm, mm,
postpartum grief. Um, yeah, and then the lovely Mrs. Mukherjee is tonally it is this one is a fairly serious, taut, but not a glum or depressing film. But the lovely
mm,
Mrs. Mukherjee is a very very laugh out loud film, which is plays up Bengali eccentricities. The man in this case, he's had 6 months of indigestion, so he's decided now he needs to get a wife because he needs to have somebody to cook for him. And Shosika, who plays the wife, she was a self-employed woman before she got married. So she was a Robindra Songit tutor, and uh, this man who's had indigestion for 6 months offers to pay rupees 5 lakh dowry, which is what the woman's brother needs to get a job in the
mm,
police force as a
mm,
donation. So she gets married, and on her marital bed, she finds a book which she thinks it's a gift from her husband, which it is. But she opens it and it says "Niramisho Amish Ranna," which means vegetarian and
non-veg.
non-vegetarian dishes recipes from her dead mother-in-law. So every day, this previously self-employed woman who ran a family with an unemployed brother is now cooking from this book, cleaning his library, uh, essentially attending to him. And
Mm,
while he's writing his magnum opus, which is he thinks he's that it has been long enough that Bengal has Tagore as a Nobel laureate. Now it is time for him to win the
mm,
Nobel for Literature.
mm.
So I thought both of them were superb comments on unpaid domestic work. Now, of course, there's a beautiful Malayalam film that everybody's talking about called The Great
Yeah,
Indian
the Great
Kitchen.
Indian
Talks
Kitchen.
about exactly, yeah.
Mm,
So that's what I had just sort of I was struck by this. In fact, I was struck by the similarity of, Swastika plays a very similar role in Patal Lok, which is much more talked about, though she
mm,
may not be cooking because she's somewhat, wealthier, affluent in this Delhi media economy. But that's what she's doing. She's keeping a beautiful home for her star journalist, uh,
husband.
editor, husband. She's the wife. She's
Mm,
she's keeping home. She's keeping him well fed and looked after.
mm,
That's what I had talked about in that film. And I thought it was actually, I mean, it was unsaid, but I think that's what journalist bosses in our lives are like, actually. Most of the media, the news media, is headed by men.
Mm,
And, we sort of, there's a romanticizing of amazing editors who are working till 3 a.m. in the morning and then back in the office by 10 a.m. How are they back in the office by 10 a.m.? They're back in the office by 10 a.m. because there's breakfast on the table, their clothes are laundered and pressed,
mm.
right? There's a structure that supports this.
Yeah.
There's a
And then there's
structure.
a
So,
structure that also, when the Me Too happens, then like my former big boss's wife, Mrs. Akbar, the wives then also present, a PR scripted, defense of the husband. And they accompany these tainted men to court along with the daughters. So it pays to have a wife, I guess, I mean, in all respects. But I'm going to bring this, for me it's been a very thoughtful conversation, uh where, as I said, as you were speaking, I was actually also thinking a lot, and not probably speaking as much as people are used to seeing me speaking. But there was a Supreme Court judgment, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, which said that married daughters also have to shoulder responsibility of aging sick parents. you know it is not something to be thrust only on single women. But we've spent, I think, the larger part of the show talking about the gender gap between men and women, or wives versus the unpaid domestic, the emotional labor and this domestic work that is never really accounted for. But I mean, I know we are only daughters, so in our case we've not really experienced it, but you, through your mother's lens, have seen the difference between your uncle and your mother, right? And I'm also talking about married sisters and single sisters, right? And the single sister sometimes voluntarily says that I'll move in with the parents because you guys have families now. So and you're right, maybe the woman who gave me her testament, after you said it, I was thinking probably her sisters washed their hands off because they had their hands full in the first place. Could highly be a probability. So, as more and more women, Shohini, are single, clearly 39% of the female population, we have our highest ever number of single women in India now. You're a primary caregiver, you're also self-employed, so you're earning your own keep and you're child free, but you have a pet, which is also a lot of work. We don't discuss pets because we don't even think about them, but I know single women who have like 4 pets, they rescue pets sometimes, and it's a lot of work. It's again investing yourself into the care of some other form of life or some other living thing. What would you like? I know a lot of, like, I've got a question saying that, I'm just going to read out this message as the last thing on the show. Dear Shohini, we are a member of the same community, but it's lovely to see you in person. Thank you so much for bringing to light such an interesting and important discussion. I am a primary caregiver like you who had to come home because my mother, after a terrible fall down the stairs, was severely paralyzed. I had lost my father exactly 6 months before that. My brothers were married, and their wives had a very, very difficult equation with my parents for reasons best known to them. As far as I know, my parents were good people. My mother still is. I've had to completely rejig my life. I've lost a lot of friends. And also, like you're saying on the show, I shudder to talk about the responsibilities of my mother to potential employers because, as if being single was not being judged enough.
yeah. Yeah, I'm glad that our conversation was something that she responded to and mentioned this.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
really have nothing to add. I mean, I wish I had something to add, but I really have nothing to add. I'm actually not aware of the Supreme Court judgment. I don't know if I should comment without knowing, reading through it, but I do feel that, as I said to you earlier as well about your friend who has married sisters but is the caregiver, I actually think women are doing the caregiving for their partners,
Mm.
parents. They're
Yeah.
doing it. I mean, if you remember, we have those friends in common. I mean, for me, they're acquaintances, but your doctor friends who mentioned that when they see cancer patients, they've noticed that, with female cancer patients, they've seen the relationship slash marriage changing
All
shape
apart. Yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah.
course of
Men
treatment.
abandon.
Yeah,
Yeah, men
but
abandon
it
their wives.
doesn't. Yeah, if even if it's not as dramatic as an abandonment, but you gradually stop seeing the partner coming, but they don't see the opposite happening.
Yeah,
They don't
yeah.
see male
That's true.
cancer patients being
That's true.
so. I think, I mean, I'm not sure why the Supreme Court said this, but I think, married daughters also have a lot on their hands. I feel. I think
Of
women have a
course,
lot
and
on their hands.
like I keep saying that it's not even in the community, because I'm asked this all the time, that is your community anti-marriage? Are you? But it's so strange that in the last 1.5 months, I've been getting so many mails, so many inboxed messages from women saying, I'm married but I'm single. Can I join your community? I want to be inspired. And
So what does that mean exactly? I'm married but single,
well, it means that I'm lonely.
separated.
I'm lonely, it means that, no, they are not separated. I asked them that, because there's a joining form. You would have also filled that up. You have to fill a joining form where you have to disclose, and it's kept confidential, how you are single. So, are you unmarried? Are you a widow? Are you separated? And women who are separated mention very clearly, legally separated, because there is now even in the passport, yesterday I think Preetha was mentioning it, that you even have the category of separated now, which was not there before. So yeah, I mean, this is not even, this conversation is not even to drive a wedge between what married women do vis-a-vis what single women do, but definitely because this is a community show and this is about single women, my focus is always on the women that at least we represent. So I
No,
think,
sure. I didn't mean to imply that, but I feel very strongly that the entire caregiving responsibility is on women.
yeah, that is always there.
Yeah.
And I just feel that, like having listened to you, having lived a lot of your truths also in my own life, I mean, there are women watching, and there's somebody who's just inboxed me saying, Shri, I just want to say that I've been a caregiver to my grandparents and my parents. I'm an only daughter like you and a divorced only daughter without any children. All I will say is that last year I had a massive heart attack. When I recovered, the doctor told me I had been missing red flags. Sometimes, when you're a caregiver, you don't even look and bother about yourself. Please end your show with a message saying, no matter how much you're doing for others, take some time and show yourself some care and love. I think
No.
that's a very valid and a very strong point. And it's something that I would always reiterate, that women who do so much, because we've seen that, as Shohini's been saying it, it's a cultural conditioning, it's the way we've been socialized, it's we're seeing it in our films. Yeah, I mean, like this community member has just messaged, and she's lived it also, that sometimes we do ignore red flags. I'm supposed to have blood tests, and sometimes I'm just lazy about it, or I have so many other things to do and think about, and my load is nothing as compared to children, or only daughters, or daughters in general, or women in general, who are taking care of much more seriously ill patients, or mothers suffering from depression, or specially able children. It's very hard. So it's been a
Okay.
great conversation. It's been a great conversation. I loved what you said, that at least through Status Single with Shri, we are starting the dialogue, which is
Yeah,
important.
of course. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you so
yeah.
much for having this conversation. And
Yeah, well, you know
it was a
how
pleasure as
important,
always.
yeah, how important I feel that what you do every day. I always tell you that, this caregiving thing that you're writing about, that your life stands for. I want to mainstream it more, because, it is also one part of a woman's life. and also of a single woman's life. And we need to mainstream it. We need to make it like more known. Like we talked about Rani Rashmoni, whose whole life, she'll be known as a Rani only. Nobody is going to ever think of her journey as a widow. So thank you, Shohini. Thank you for making the time. And thank you for discussing a lot of personal, these are, for some, it could be called triggers, because, you're talking about a very difficult, complex part of your life, with a lot of decisions which may be still impacting you or which change the course of your life. You're doing the book now, so der hai lekin durust hai, as they say in Hindi.
Yeah.
So that's great, and I wish you all the best with your debut novel. As I said, the next time hopefully you're on the show, I'm sure it'll be sooner, but if not, then I hope to add many more felicitations to your name. All right, so thank
Yeah.
you so much,
Thank you.
Shini. Great, Adda. Thanks a lot. And we'll see you
Thank you.
tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. with another great guest. Watch us live. Follow us on Facebook, My Community, Our Community is Status Single. And over to tomorrow and another great discussion. Cheers. Good night. Bye, Shohini.
Good night. Bye. Bye.